Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Assessment Office Hours. Thank you for joining us this week. Today, once again, we'll be sharing topics that have been come up in communications with districts regarding remote proctoring, the summative in-person administration for NGSS and Smarter Balance. We will also include reminders concerning testing special population students. Remember, there are only 15 days left of testing, so the end of the window is quickly approaching. As usual, there are some reminder slides that we put in here, but also some new items this week. So you'll get some late breaking news in the following office hours. Please use the question feature, as always, of the GoToMeeting to submit any questions, and we'll address them via a text response throughout the meeting. And we will also handle some possibly by voice at the end. Please mute your microphones. Be aware that this is being recorded, and also be aware that the PowerPoint is, as usual, in the handout section of the GoToWebinar. Okay, I'm joined today by some members, our awesome members of the Performance Office assessment staff. Deirdre Ducharme and Janet Stuck, who work on special populations, are here. ID and hi, Janet. Thanks for joining. Also on the call is Jeff Gregg and myself, Abe Christ, Bureau Chief in the Performance Office. Also from our office out there, Christy Alvarino, who works on Smarter Balance and handles critically the appeals at this time of the year. Michelle Rosado, who is handling the behind the scenes here. Thanks, Michelle, for helping and running things here, and is also our SAT program manager, as well as many other things, is on the call. And then Marlene Shamaroy, also on the call today as well. Also from on the call is our partner vendor, Cambium Assessments, Amber Benlian, Jen Cho, and Marie Uzamechi. They're all on the call here today to help out with various questions that might come up. Be mindful that the help desk email and number is here, the 844-202-7583. These numbers are critical just because this time of year, if you have issues with remote testing, we are really encouraging to reach out for technical support to these numbers or to this email. Okay, so a little bit of an update on where we are in terms of testing. You can see through this chart that we've had a total of about, as of 5 a.m. this morning, 416,000 tests have been started. 373,000 tests have been completed. We are pretty much past the halfway mark. And since last week at this time, over 200,000 more tests have been started. So the pace of testing has really picked up. As I mentioned, there's only 3 more weeks of testing after this week, and be mindful that includes that one holiday Monday, the Memorial Day weekend. We are still planning on closing testing on June 4th, 2021. As we've mentioned in past office hours, there was an extension for loss, but at this point we are planning to end testing on June 4th, that Friday. So being that it's that time of year, we want to mention the importance of monitoring test completion. It's very important that districts and schools track completion for students taking Smarter, NGSS, or CTAA and CTAS assessments, as well as the submission of the Connecticut Alternate Assessment Eligibility Form. Here's a snapshot of the reports that can be run, as well as some links to these resources on how to use these reports. The monitoring test progress brochure contains instructions for generating the test status code reports and the test completion rates and tide. These are awesome tools that can be used to track test completion for students at both the district and school level. Also, the Accessing Participation Reports brochure provides instructions for how to extract participation reports from TIDE for CTAA and the Connecticut Alternate Assessment Eligibility Form. remember that the Connecticut Alternate Assessment Eligibility Form is required in order to confirm student eligibility prior to the administration of any alternate assessment. So be mindful, these reports are in high use this time of year, and I know many districts already have started using them, running reports, and they can be used to track all participation for this year. Okay, administration expectations, excuse me. For Smarter Balance and NGSS summative assessments, as we've said before, think location, location, location. In other words, if a student is in school with an in-person proctor, then they should be tested in person. This looks just like testing has always looked in past years. However, if a student is fully remote but can come into school on a safe campus location, they are also tested in person. Then if a student is fully remote, they would be testing remote. Be mindful that for the alternate assessments, there is no remote proctoring tool for the alternate assessments, and we are not recommending a remote administration. However, if a student is fully remote, and it would be possible to administer the test only if a trained teacher is available in person to administer that assessment in a one-on-one situation. Okay, so some lesson learned. Once again, some of these are repeats from past weeks, just because these questions have come up again and again, and we want to reiterate the importance. Some of these are new news based on things that we've been getting in the past week or two. So first off is please contact the help desk immediately, the 844-202-7583, if you have any technical issues with testing. In particular, we're aware that some districts for remote testing have had some issues in terms of connectivity. If you have any of these issues, in order for us to help you, in order for Cambium to help, they really need to be aware of the details of the situation. So please report these to the help desk. They've been doing a great job up to this point in the attest administration, helping problem solve districts. And so please do take the time to contact them. Also, cameras must be on continuously during the test administration. As soon as a testing or a camera goes off, testing should be paused, whether it's intentional or not intentional. If a student either turns it off or there's a technical issue, again, testing should be paused immediately. Be mindful of the max 10 grouping recommendation for remote testing. Again, you can go past that. We're recommending no more than 10, just because of the challenges of monitoring groups larger than 10. There's the script and the remote proctoring, TAM, that can be followed. It's highly recommended. And then also for testing, be mindful that for Smarter Balance, you can cross locations in terms of test setting. So for instance, you can start a testing in school, then go to a remote location, make sure to change the setting and tide, and finish that test in a remote location. However, for NGSS, testing has to begin and end in the same location, just because there are different forms across each location. Continuing with lessons learned, in-person students should be administered tests in the traditional manner in school, and students who are not in the same space as the proctor, for whatever reason, are considered remote students. We've had districts asking questions about what consists of remote, what consists of in-person. Really, in-person is the old way we used to do business, and then if you're not in the same location, that would be considered a remote test. Also, for all assessments, for both standard and alternate, please remind proctors to confirm that they are administering the correct assessment and that supports and accommodations have been checked prior to testing to make sure that students are provided with the correct accommodations. We have had a number of appeals, lots of appeals actually, where students are either not getting the correct accommodations or not getting them at all, and we've had to use appeals for that to resolve those situations. And then finally, the last lessons learned for this week, as just an FYI, If any students had any speech to text issues from this past week, please contact the help desk, and they can advise you on appeals that might have to be submitted. Again, if a student had any speech to text issues from this past week that might have occurred, we had a couple districts alert us of an issue, and we want to make sure that if there was an issue in any of your districts, that we can certainly allow students to use an appeal to get back into that test to get the accommodation. Don't forget, again, this is a reminder, don't forget to set the remote proctoring indicator and tide before a student can take the remote summative assessment. For districts that have a large amount of students, there is information in the TAM that will provide directions on a bulk upload for this, for instances where there's a large amount of students in need of remote proctoring. Don't forget about appeals. As I mentioned several times, actually on a previous slide, make sure all students have their proper accommodations set and they're receiving their proper accommodations. Also make sure that teachers are administering the correct test. So for instance, we've had some proctors administering the summative assessment when their intention was to administer the practice test. We can fix those situations using appeals. However, it makes for district work on your side and on our side. We're just reminding districts to be mindful that proctors should be setting the correct test and approving the correct test when students enter. And then finally, if students do have issues with accommodation issues, there might be an appeal required, or there will likely be an appeal required, and you'll likely hear from Christy Alberino. As I mentioned, Christy's handling all our appeals that come in, and she's probably going to be asking you for this information that's outlined here on this slide. Okay, the next couple slides, we just want to, we notified districts several times throughout the year. We're reminding everyone again the connection between PSIS and the state summative assessments, and how really the PSIS coordinators should be coordinating closely with the testing coordinators to ensure student information is reported accurately. We rely on student information in PSIS for reporting tremendously, and so here, these statuses, PSIS Reg should reflect these student statuses at the time of testing. They're all listed here, and this is not a change at all from years past. We're just reminding you that these statuses should reflect student status during testing. Also remember that you have until June 4th to any changes that might need to be made. That's when we will lock the testing values, just because that's the end of the window. And also keep in mind, in order to enter accommodations in TIDE, students must be identified as either special education or 504 in the registration module. If they're not, you won't be able to enter any accommodations for those students. Okay, some more, I know we've had some new items this office hours. We've been getting a lot of questions regarding reporting. So what about reporting for SMART, NGSS, CTAA, and CTOS? First off, I just want to mention that these points here are still tentative, but these are things we are shooting for, but they are tentative. So if you're writing these down or sharing these, please write these in pencil and be mindful that just due to the nature of the testing this year, the dates might change. But we are still planning on a late June release in the centralized reporting system for NGSS, SMART, CTAA, and CTOS for in-person testing. So if you remember in years past, we would release mid to late June. I think the last 2 or 3 years we've done that. We're shooting for a mid to late June release still, again, just for in-person scores using the CAI CRS system. In terms of remote testers, we will be holding on to those for scores for a little bit, pending analysis by CSDE and CAI. So we haven't released a date yet for release of those scores. Those scores would eventually be coming, but again, we want to, there has to be some analysis done before those are released, but we are aware that obviously districts are very interested in those scores, and they will be coming as well soon after, hopefully soon after the June release. We've been getting questions about the ISRs for both CTA and CTOS, as well as NGSS and Smarter. We're still planning a distribution of the ISRs sometime after Labor Day. Remember, in years past, we've sent those out to districts, I don't know, mid-September, and then districts have distributed them based on their own plans and their own methods, really. And we will still be shooting for those dates. Again, that's a tentative distribution. But at this point, we are still shooting for generally about the same timeline that we have been in the past, just so you can circulate those to parents and so forth. And then finally, EdSite reporting, both public and secure. That is in the works. We will be reporting results on EdSite. As we've said before, and I know we've been getting district feedback in terms of what they will look like. And there haven't been any mock-ups shared, but it will look much different. But know that we will be sharing these scores on EdSite, and the reports will look different from previous years. Watch out for a date on that, please. Sorry about the phone ringing here too. Okay, so I'm gonna turn things over to Janet, who's gonna touch on some other tips and cover some special populations issues. Janet, I think you might be on. Yep. There you go.
So I wanted to remind you about the importance of the use of the practice test. Oh, did I just do something wrong? I think we lost the slides. There we go. So you can see on this slide, this red arrow is pointing to the area for the TA and practice training site on the portal. This is the area where you need to go to administer a practice test to your students rather than the test administration site. We've had some students go in thinking they were accessing the practice site when in fact they were accessing the summative assessment. So we want to make sure that you do some practice to familiarize the student with the environment and the tools. And this is really helpful. You can use it within the remote testing environment to acclimate the student to the process of logging in when you're not visible. Next slide, please. So when the student logs in, they would select the practice and training test card on the portal and access the sign-in screen. And then they would toggle off the guest user to enter their first name and SACID, and that allows their accommodations to come through. And then they would verify their information and select the appropriate practice test. And just like within the real test, you want to make sure that students check their grade, because if the grade is incorrect, you don't want to be administering the assessment. You want to make sure that you contact your district administrator or your PSIS coordinator to make sure that the grade that the student's enrolled in is reflected appropriately in PSIS. Then it would be accurate in TIDE, and the student would be taking the appropriate test. Next slide, please. So we've had several calls on students accessing text-to-speech or it not working, and we want to make sure that you're working with your students to show them how to access the text-to-speech. There is a drop-down that allows the student to access it. You'll see it if the text-to-speech is turned on. You'll see in the second slide here where it's turned on, a microphone, and the student can then in the next slide we'll show you that the student can actually adjust the volume and the pitch. So when they click on the switch, they can adjust through the sliding scales the sound of the text-to-speech to make it more accessible for them. Next slide, please. Excuse me. So we've also had calls about speech to text. So you want to make sure that within the TIDE accommodation test settings, that if a student is supposed to have the embedded text-to-speech, which means the computer is providing the speech-to-text application, that this is turned on in the test settings. The non-embedded speech-to-text requires the permissive mode and another, typically a third-party software system such as Dragon Dictate or something like that. But this one is the embedded speech-to-text that you just have to activate within the TIDE test settings. Next slide, please. So we've had several calls about the alternate assessment system requirements. They have not changed over the past few years. Remember that all teachers who are administering an alternate assessment are required to participate in training. And this is an annual training because it captures the nuances of any changes within the system or expectations. In addition to the training, when a PPT determines a student is going to be participating in the alternate assessment, the trained teacher must submit the alternate assessment eligibility form. These were due by February 15th. If the teacher is submitting it after that date, they must also call the CAI help desk to request the alternate assessment indicator to be turned on. And if you go to the next slide, they can call the help desk and request that the alternate indicator flag be turned to yes. Once this occurs, all assessments will be accessible for the trained TA and the student, as well as the required directions for test administration and the PDFs of the test itself. That's for the CTA. And these teachers will also be able to administer the CTAS for the science and submit the score worksheets through the DEI. Next slide, please. So if you're checking to see if in fact your trained teacher administered the assessment or has submitted the eligibility form, you can see in the student participation section of each student's profile the Connecticut alternate assessment eligibility form with the date it was submitted. If you look at the date and then you look at the alternate assessment indicator, you can determine if they should have or already did make a call to the help desk. Because what happens is the only test available to those students, if the alternate assessment indicator is not selected to yes, is the standard test. And we have had some instances where, unfortunately, students have sat for an entire test in the standard form before the teacher realized that the student should have been on an alternate assessment. So we definitely want to avoid that. Next slide, please. Another alternate assessment area that we've had calls on, and we want to make sure it's clear, is the early stopping rule. So the early stopping rule is for a relatively small group of students who do not have an established communication system and cannot demonstrate an observable response. So these students would have credit for participation in the assessment, but not be able to complete the assessment. So if you go to the next slide, Abe, thanks. This is the flow chart that describes what the teachers need to do if they feel their student qualifies for an alternate, for an early stopping rule. So these students are typically much more complex. In many cases, they don't have a mode of communication. They may be learning to use their AAC devices or supports, or learning some assistive technology or even a picture system. to communicate. They may be learning cause and effect. So these students, rather than put them through the entire assessment, teachers determine by administering the first 4 items of the ELA and the first 4 items of math. If the student cannot respond, then they leave the test in pause and they call either myself or Deidre to respond to some questions. And then that student would get credit for being a participant. If the student is in grades 5, 8, or 11, they would administer the first activity in the science assessment. And if the student is not able to respond, then they would be considered an early stopping rule for science as well. And just so you know, we do have some students who qualify for early stopping rule for ELA and math, but not for science. And this is because the science test is structured very differently. It's hands-on and it's more of a performance task, and some students are able to manage that in a different manner. Next slide, please. Because we're nearing the end of the testing window, we wanted to share with you the procedure for the emergency medical exemption. So because we do have an accountability waiver this year, this may not be as critical for you as a district, but we wanted to alert you to what the process is. If a student is unable to attend school and is medically or emotionally unavailable for homebound or hospitalized instruction for the entire testing window, they may qualify for a medical exemption. And the key piece here is for the entire testing window. So if you feel that you have a student who qualifies for a medical exemption and want to pursue it, you would contact either myself or Deidre. And and this is for the district administrator would be the person contacting us with the information about the student, and we would process it. And what happens is that we provide the district administrator with a form that the student's physician completes and then is provided back to us to document the medical exemption. Next slide, please. We just wanted to remind you again of where many of the resources are related to special populations. A quick access is through the resources area on the portal. Typically the first 3 drop-down areas are chock full of helpful information. That's it.
Okay, thanks, Janet. We appreciate it. So we're at that point in the office hours where we take questions, and please type them in, and we can take them through audio here. We'd be happy to do that. Any questions that come in, and actually I see one question that came in, or one I guess observation slash question. Actually, I appreciate the question because it's related to that last point I made, that I was sort of highly distracted because the phone was ringing here on my side, so I get to reiterate. I get a redo on that answer. So the question is, will there be changes in how the data will be reported out to districts? Will the data appear like it has in the past, or will it be more limited? There's also an observation about the ISR. I'm not entirely sure. If that person wants to email me, certainly I would help you, but if you have that question, let me know still. But in terms of the reporting, yeah, we are still planning on reporting the data that's released on the centralized reporting system in June will look very similar to what has been released in the past, using the same system. So it's on a student level and the district level. So you'll have that district access. It'll look much like it has in the past. Remember, it's only secure. It's not released to the public. Then in terms of EdSite public reporting, remember, we're not doing any accountability reporting due to the waiver, but we will be doing some level of assessment reporting. We, due to the uniqueness of this year in terms of the in-person remote, it's not going to just be simply pushing up to EdSite just like we always have. We're getting feedback right now through various means in terms of what would be helpful. We're also mindful of districts just because of, so for instance, like remote, if there's like an asterisk and an explanation needed, and what the report might separate remote and in person. Again, I'm sort of talking off the cuff here, so please mark that in pencil. But yes, the reports will look significantly different. We're not pushing them up as they have typically looked. Okay, yeah, thank you. Any questions, any other questions? I don't see any popping up here, but we will give it a minute or two. Really, any questions related to testing, we'd love to hear them if you have any. You can always email us at the ctstudentassessment@ct.gov email. You can always call us at the 713-6860 number. You can also reach out to us directly if you normally interact with any of us. I know some of you, I see some of our frequent attendees are on the call today. You can certainly email us, but any other questions? The CAI team is also on the call right now if you want to ask them something as well. I'll give it another 30 seconds or so. Okay. Seeing none from any of the attendees, thank you for attending today. We appreciate you taking the time to attend today. Thank you to my colleagues at CAI and also the CSDE team. Thanks everyone. Thanks for the behind the scenes help. I really appreciate it. Michelle, Janet, Deirdre, and Jen attending from CAI. Thanks everyone, and we appreciate it. We'll see you next week at the same time.